Listen, and I shall tell you how the world of heroes was brought to ruin. I shall sing of a war that shook the foundations of the earth and stained the heavens with the smoke of a burning city. But this war, this legendary conflict that would echo through eternity, did not begin on a battlefield with the clash of bronze. It did not begin with the roar of men or the splintering of shields. No, the Trojan War began, as so many great and terrible things do, with the vanity of gods and the folly of a single mortal man. It began at a wedding. You must understand that the gods of Olympus, for all their immortality and power, are creatures of passion, jealousy, and above all, fear. The mightiest of them all, Zeus, the king of gods and men, whose thunderbolt could shatter mountains, lived in the shadow of a terrible prophecy. For a god who had seized power by overthrowing his own father, Cronus, this was a threat that could not be ignored. For a god who had seized power by overthrowing his own father, Cronus, this was a threat that could not be ignored. So Zeus, in his cold and calculating wisdom, devised a plan. He would not risk searing his own doom. So Zeus, in his cold and calculating wisdom, devised a plan. He would not risk searing his own doom. In this, Zeus saw a solution to more than one of his divine burdens. The earth, he felt, was groaning under the weight of humanity. And a great war would be a brutally efficient way to cull the population. It would also serve to sweep away the generation of demigods, many of them his own offspring, whose heroic might was beginning to blur the line between the mortal and the divine. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis would be the catalyst, the first carefully placed stone that would trigger the avalanche of fate. The wedding feast was a spectacle of celestial grandeur. Upon the slopes of Mount Pelion, the gods and goddesses of Olympus gathered in all their glory. Ambrosia flowed like wine, and the music of Apollo's lyre enchanted the very trees. Every immortal was invited, every deity welcomed, save one. Eris, the grim-faced goddess of discord, was deliberately snubbed, for who would invite strife to a celebration of union? It was a fatal error. As the festivities reached their peak, a shadow fell over the gathering. Eris, her eyes burning with resentment, appeared at the edge of the clearing. She did not speak a word. She simply drew from her dark robes a single perfect apple of purest gold, and upon its gleaming skin were etched the words, "Callisti for the fairest." With a contemptuous flick of her wrist, she rolled the apple into the center of the divine assembly, where it came to a stop at the feet of the three most powerful goddesses, and then chaos. Hera, the queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus, and protector of marriage, claimed it as her right. Her bearing was regal, her gaze imperious. Who could be fairer than the queen herself? But Athena, the warrior goddess, born fully formed from the head of Zeus, her gray eyes flashing with wisdom and strategic fire, also reached for it. Beauty, she contended, was not mere appearance, but the perfection of mind and skill. And then there was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, born from the sea foam. She did not argue or boast. She simply smiled, a smile that could make the hearts of gods and men ache with a longing they could not name. And she too laid claim to the prize. The argument that followed threatened to tear Olympus apart. Zeus, seeing the abyss of their fury, knew he could not judge between his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of desire without inviting eternal wrath from the two he spurned. Once again, his cunning mind sought a mortal scapegoat. He commanded Hermes, the messenger god, to take the goddesses and the golden apple down to the mortal realm, to the slopes of Mount Ida, near the mighty city of Troy. There, a young shepherd, known for his fairness and beauty, would be their judge. This shepherd was no simple rustic. He was Paris, a prince of Troy, son of King Priam. But an ominous dream at his birth had led his parents to believe he would be the city's downfall, and so he had been cast out as an infant, left to die only to be saved and raised by shepherds unaware of his royal blood. It was to this young man, his mind on his flock and the mountain winds, that three incandescent beings suddenly appeared, the very air shimmering with their power. Hermes presented the case, and Paris, struck dumb with terror and awe, could only stare. Then the bribes began. Each goddess in turn drew him aside and whispered a promise that would tempt the very soul of a man. Hera went first. She dismissed the others with a wave of her hand and spoke of power, "Choose me," she commanded, her voice like the rolling of thunder, "and I will make you king of all Asia. You will have wealth beyond imagining and power that even the greatest rulers will envy. All mortals will bow to you." She filled his mind with visions of sprawling empires, of kneeling kings and chests overflowing with jewels. Then came Athena, her gaze sharp and penetrating. She spoke not of gold, but of glory. "Forget such fleeting things," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I offer you wisdom and counsel and victory in every battle. No army will stand against you. Your name will be synonymous with military genius, will be the greatest warrior the world has ever known." She let him feel the thrill of a perfectly executed strategy, the weight of a conquered standard in his hand. Finally, Aphrodite approached. She did not offer empires or battles. She simply leaned close, her breath smelling of myrrh and roses, and whispered of a different kind of conquest. "What is power or glory?" she murmured, her voice a melody of pure desire compared to love. "Choose me, sweet Paris, and I shall give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name is Helen, Queen of Sparta. She will be yours." And as she spoke, she conjured in his mind an image of Helen's face, a face of such impossible, heart-stopping beauty that all thoughts of kingdoms and conquests turned to ash in his mind. For a young man who had known only the lonely beauty of the mountains, the choice was no choice at all. He took the golden apple, its surface now warm to the touch, and placed it in Aphrodite's outstretched hand. In that moment, the fate of Troy was sealed. Aphrodite smiled in triumph, but behind her, the faces of Hera and Athena hardened into masks of cold, implacable fury. They did not rage or scream, they simply turned, and in their shared glance was a silent, terrible vow. Paris, and the city that had spawned him, would be utterly destroyed. True to her word, Aphrodite guided Paris. He was soon rediscovered by his family and restored to his rightful place as a prince of Troy. Then, under the guise of a diplomatic mission, he set sail for Sparta, the kingdom of the mighty warrior king Menelaus. There, in the great hall of the Spartan palace, he was welcomed as an honored guest. Menelaus, bound by the sacred laws of Zenith, holy bond between host and guest protected by Zeus, himself opened his home and his heart to the handsome Trojan prince. And it was there that Paris first laid eyes on Helen. The vision Aphrodite had shown him was but a pale shadow of the reality. She was more than beautiful. She was luminous, a woman who seemed to carry the light of the stars within her. And when Cupid, the mischievous son of Aphrodite, let fly an invisible arrow, Helen looked upon Paris, and felt a love so sudden and overwhelming that it swept away all thoughts of her husband, her kingdom, and her honor. When Menelaus was called away to Crete for a funeral, Paris seized his chance. Whether he abducted a struggling queen or eloped with a willing lover is a question poets have debated for ages. What is known is this: when Menelaus returned, his bed was empty, his wife was gone, and a vast portion of his treasury had been stolen. Paris had not only taken Helen, he had shattered the sacred trust of hospitality, a crime that cried out to the heavens for vengeance. The rage of Menelaus was a fearsome thing to behold, but his personal fury would not have been enough to launch 1,000 ships. It was his brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae, the most powerful and ambitious ruler in all of Greece, who saw the larger opportunity. This was more than a quest to retrieve a stolen wife. It was a chance to unite the fractious Greek kingdoms under his command and to break the power of their great rival across the sea. Agamemnon invoked the oath of Tyndareus. Years before, when Helen's beauty had drawn suitors from every corner of the Hellenic world, her father, King Tyndareus, had made them all swear a solemn vow that they would defend the honor of whomever was chosen as her husband. Now, that oath was called due. Messengers were sent to every palace, to every island kingdom, to Pylos, to summon the wise old Nestor, to Salamis, for the giant warrior Ajax, to Ithaca, to find the cunning Odysseus, who so loathed the prospect of war that he feigned madness, only to be tricked into revealing his sanity, and to Phtia, to call upon the greatest warrior of them all, the son of Peleus and Thetis, the swift-footed godlike Achilles. A young man who had been given a choice by the fates, a long peaceful life of obscurity, or a short violent life of eternal glory. He chose glory. And so the storm gathered. Across the Aegean, from every port and harbor, the black-hulled ships were being prepared. Bronze was being forged into spearheads and greaves. Oars were being carved. Sails were being woven. An army the likes of which the world had never seen was mustering, a coalition of heroes bound by an old oath and a thirst for glory. All united under the banner of the house of Atreus. They were coming for Helen. They were coming for honor. They were coming for Troy. The seeds of discord, sown at a wedding feast by a slighted goddess, had taken root in the hearts of men, and were about to bear a terrible, bloody fruit. The sight at Aulis was one to make the very gods pause and wonder at the ambition of mortals. A forest of 1,000 masts clawed at the sky. The dark hulls of the Achaean ships packed so tightly in the bay that a man could walk from one end to the other without touching the water. From every corner of the Hellenic world they had come, an alliance forged by oath and outrage. The greatest heroes of the age were there. The giant Ajax, his shield like a tower. The cunning Odysseus, his mind a labyrinth of strategy. The wise old Nestor, his words a balm of experience. And the mighty Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, commander of them all, his heart swelling with pride at the magnificent, terrible force he had assembled. But the gods are not so easily impressed by mortal pride. For weeks, the great fleet lay idle, its sails hanging limp and useless. The air was still and heavy, the sea a sheet of glass, a dead calm, unnatural and suffocating, had fallen upon the bay. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the ships into ovens and the shore into a furnace. Supplies began to dwindle. Water grew foul in the skins. The men, once eager for glory and plunder, grew restless, their whispers turning from boasts of victory to grumbles of discontent. The great army, the pride of Greece, was rotting from the inside out before it had even set sail. Agamemnon, his brow furrowed with worry, summoned the seer Calchas, a man whose eyes could pierce the veil between the mortal and divine worlds. Calchas, his face pale and his hands trembling, performed the rites. Reading the omens and the entrails of a sacrificed goat and the flight of birds against the brazen sky, the verdict, when it came, was spoken in a voice choked with dread. The stillness was the work of Artemis, the virgin huntress, goddess of the wild. Agamemnon, in his arrogance, had boasted that his skill with the bow surpassed even hers. For this hubris, the goddess demanded a terrible price to release the winds. She demanded a sacrifice, not a bull, not a prize stallion, but the king's own daughter, the maiden Iphigenia. The words struck Agamemnon like a physical blow. Silence fell over the assembled kings, silence more profound than the windless air. Iphigenia, his firstborn, the light of his palace in Mycenae. The thought was monstrous, an abomination against nature and fatherhood. He railed against the gods, against his fate, against the seer who had delivered the ghastly message. He would not do it. He would disband the army, let the enterprise fail, let his brother's honor go unavenged. He would not murder his own child. But the crown of a high king is a heavy burden. Menelaus, his face a mask of grief and desperation, reminded him of their purpose. Odysseus, ever the pragmatist, spoke of the army, of the thousands of men on the verge of mutiny, of the shame that would follow them home if they failed. He spoke of the greater good, of the necessity of war, of the cold logic of command. For days, Agamemnon wrestled with his soul, a war raging within him more terrible than any he would face at Troy. In the end, ambition, duty, and the crushing weight of 1,000 waiting ships won out over the love of a father. His heart turned to stone within his chest. He agreed. A lie was dispatched to Mycenae, a lie as cruel as the knife that would soon be sharpened. A message was sent to his wife, Queen Clytemnestra, telling her to bring Iphigenia to Aulis at once. The reason, a great honor. Their daughter was to be wed to the greatest warrior in the Achaean host, the glorious Achilles. It was a brilliant, venomous deception. Clytemnestra, her heart filled with pride, prepared her daughter for the journey. Dreaming of the royal dynasty, her child would begin. Achilles, meanwhile, knew nothing of the matter, his name used as bait in a trap of unimaginable cruelty. When the queen and princess arrived at Aulis, the festive air they expected was absent. In its place was a grim solemnity. The truth was revealed. and Clytemnestra's cries of horror and betrayal echoed through the camp. She pleaded with her husband. She cursed him, but his resolve was absolute. She turned to Achilles, whose honor had been sullied by the use of his name in this vile plot. The young warrior, enraged at the deception and moved by the plight of the innocent girl, vowed to protect her. He would stand against Agamemnon and the entire army if he had to. But when he spoke to his own men, the Myrmidons, he found them swayed by the seers and the desperation of the becalmed army. They would not stand with him against the will of the gods. Achilles was powerless. And so, the final dreadful act was set. Iphigenia, her wedding dress, now a sacrificial gown, was led to a makeshift altar. Some say she went weeping and struggling, dragged by the king's guards. Others whispered that in a moment of terrible, tragic nobility, she went willingly, understanding that her death would save the honor of Greece. As Agamemnon raised the bronze knife, his face hidden in his cloak to shield his eyes from the sight, a great cry went up from the assembled army. At that very moment, a wind began to stir. It rustled the leaves, it ruffled the banners, it filled the slack sails of the waiting ships. Artemis had been appeased, the price had been paid. The fleet could sail for Troy, but it did so under a dark cloud. Its voyage purchased with the blood of an innocent, a crime that would never be forgotten or forgiven. The journey across the wind-dark Aegean was swift, the 1,000 ships a terrifying armada moving as one.
Ow.
But the Trojans were not idle. Warned by their own seers and scouts, they lined the high cliffs and beaches, their spears a forest of bronze, ready to repel the invaders. As the Greek ships neared the shore, another prophecy was remembered. A grim twin to the one at Aulis. The first Achaean to set foot on Trojan soil was fated to be the first to die. A silence fell upon the lead ships. The heroes, for all their courage, hesitated. To be the first to die, to be denied the glory of the long war to commit, was a bitter fate. Then, one man, Protesilaus, lord of Phallis, his heart burning with a desperate valor, made his choice. Shouting a prayer to the gods, he leaped from the prow of his ship and charged up the sandy beach. For a moment he was magnificent, a lone figure carving a path through the Trojan ranks. But only for a moment. A spear, thrown by the mighty hand of Hector himself, Prince of Troy, found its mark, and Protesilaus fell. His life's blood the first to stain the foreign shore. His death broke the spell of fear. With a roar of rage, the Achaeans poured from their ships. The battle on the beach was a maelstrom of chaos and slaughter.
Ow.
Men fought knee-deep in the surf, the water turning red around them. Achilles was a whirlwind of destruction, his spear and sword a blur of deadly motion. He cut down Sickness, a son of Poseidon, whose skin was said to be impervious to bronze, by strangling him with his own helmet strap. The giant Ajax swung his massive shield, crushing men beneath it, his spear reaping a bloody harvest. Faced with such fury, the Trojans broke and fled, retreating to the one place the Greeks could not follow, behind the massive impenetrable walls of their city. The Achaeans had won the beach, but as they dragged their ships onto the sand and began to build their sprawling camp, they stared up at the towering stone ramparts of Troy and knew the war had only just begun. And so began the 9 lost years. The storytellers, even the great Homer, sing mostly of the 10th and final year, for that is where the greatest drama lies. But do not mistake this silence for peace. Those 9 years were a long, slow, grinding war of attrition, a decade of suffering that honed the heroes and broke the spirits of lesser men. The Greek camp became a city in its own right, a chaotic sprawl of wooden huts, tents, and forges, stretching for miles along the coast, protected by a ditch and a wooden palisade. The war was not a constant pitched battle. The walls of Troy, said to have been built by the gods, Poseidon and Apollo themselves, were too strong for any direct assault. Instead, the conflict settled into a grim rhythm. The Trojans would sally forth from their gates to test the Greek lines, and great duels would be fought on the plain between the city and the sea. But mostly, the war was fought elsewhere. With their command of the sea, the Greeks used their camp as a base for a vast campaign of piracy and raiding. The great heroes did not sit idle. Achilles and Ajax in particular were relentless. They led their own armies on separate expeditions, systematically dismantling Troy's network of allies and cutting off its supplies. Achilles, a specter of death, was the most feared. He sacked 11 inland cities and 12 coastal islands, leaving a trail of fire and ruin. From these raids, he brought back immense wealth: gold, bronze, cattle, and women. It was during one of these raids that he captured a beautiful princess from Lyrnessus, the girl named Briseis, whom he took as his prize and grew to love. This prize, won by his own spear, would become the focal point of a conflict far more dangerous to the Greek cause than any Trojan attack. Ajax, too, carved a path of destruction through the Thracian peninsula, killing a son-in-law of Priam and carrying off the princess Tecmessa. These raids served a dual purpose. They enriched the Achaean army and slowly strangled the life out of Troy, which now stood alone, its allies conquered or too terrified to help. But 9 years is a lifetime. The men who had arrived as eager youths were now hardened, scarred veterans. They had forgotten the faces of their wives and children. The rich soil of Greece was a distant memory. Homesickness was a plague as deadly as any sent by Apollo. The endless cycle of skirmishes, the constant watchfulness, the poor food, and the ever-present specter of a meaningless death far from home wore them down. The piles of plunder grew, but so did the graves. Near the end of the 9th year, the army's morale finally broke. A mutiny erupted, started as a murmur in the tents, and swelled into a roar on the assembly ground. Men threw down their spears, refusing to fight any longer. They cried out for the ships to be launched, for a return to their homes, with or without their kings. The great expedition, the cause of honor, was on the verge of collapsing into a panicked, shameful retreat. The leaders were stunned. Agamemnon's authority vanished. It was the cunning Odysseus who saved them. Stepping into the chaos, he used every tool at his disposal: azon, threats, shame, and appeals to their greed for the final, greatest prize of Troy itself to turn the tide. He reminded them of the prophecies, of the shame of returning empty-handed after 9 years of sacrifice. Slowly, reluctantly, the mutiny subsided. Achilles, too, his voice a thunder of command, forced his own men to stay, his will an iron dam against the flood of despair. The army held. But the incident laid bare the fragile state of the Achaean alliance. The heroes were weary, the men were on edge, and the resentments that had been simmering for 9 long years were now boiling just beneath the surface. They had survived the enemy without, but the enemy within pride, greed, and exhaustion was proving to be far more dangerous. As the 9th year bled into the 10th, a tense stalemate settled over the plain. The Greeks, their mutiny quelled, but their spirits low, remained in their camp. The Trojans, their allies gone, and their resources dwindling, remained behind their mighty walls. 10 years of war had passed, thousands were dead. The greatest city in Asia Minor was besieged by the greatest army ever assembled in Greece. And yet nothing was decided, the stage was set. All that was needed was a single spark to ignite the final, terrible conflagration. That spark was about to be struck, not by a Trojan hand, but by the arrogance of the High King himself. And it would unleash a rage so profound it would shake both heaven and earth, and finally bring the heroes to their fated, glorious, and tragic end. The wrath of Achilles, the heart of the epic. Sing, O Muse, of the rage of Achilles. Sing of the rage that was murderous and doomed, that cost the Achaean armies countless losses, that hurled down to the house of death so many sturdy souls of heroes, and made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds. For this was the will of Zeus, moving toward its end. The war was not won or lost on the plains of Troy, not at first. It was lost and nearly won again, in the heart of a single man. For 9 years, the conflict had been a slow, grinding stalemate of raids and skirmishes. But the 10th year began not with the clash of swords, but with the silent, creeping death of a plague. An unseen hand sent arrows of pestilence into the Greek camp. First the mules and dogs fell, then the men, one after another, collapsing at their posts. Their bodies consumed by a fever that burned like the funeral pyres, that now lit the sky day and night. For 9 days the plague raged, and on the 10th, Achilles, His heart, moved by the sight of his dying comrades, called an assembly. He stood before the hollow-eyed soldiers and demanded that the seer Calchas reveal the cause of Apollo's wrath. The seer, trembling, agreed, but only after Achilles swore a mighty oath to protect him, for he knew his words would strike at the most powerful man in the army. "The god is not angry over some broken vow or missed sacrifice," Calchas declared, his voice ringing across the silent gathering. "He is angered because of his priest Chryses, whom Agamemnon dishonored." The king refused the ransom and sent the old man away with insults. "Apollo will not lift this plague until the girl, the bright-eyed Chryses, is returned to her father freely, without price, and a holy sacrifice is made at her home." A dark fury rose in Agamemnon. He leaped to his feet, his eyes blazing. "Prophet of evil," he roared, "never have you spoken a word of good for me. And now you demand I give up my prize. I love her more than my own wife, Clytemnestra, but so be it. I will give her back, if that is what must be done to save the army. But I will not be the only Greek left without a prize. It is not fitting. You will all find me a prize of honor to replace her, one equal to what I have lost." It was then that Achilles, swift-footed and godlike, but with a temper as fiery as his hair, stepped forward. "Son of Atreus," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, most grasping of all men. "How can the great-hearted Achaeans give you a prize now? We have divided the spoils of the cities we have sacked. It is not right to take them back from the men who won them. Give the girl back to the god. When we sack the mighty city of Troy, we will repay you 3 and 4 times over." The words were a spark to Agamemnon's pride, which was already a field of dry tinder. The High King saw not counsel, but a challenge to his authority from his greatest, most arrogant warrior. "Do not think to cheat me, Achilles. Godlike as you are," Agamemnon spat back. "You want to keep your own prize, while I sit here empty-handed? No. If the army will not give me a prize to my liking, then I will come and take one myself. Perhaps from Ajax or Odysseus, perhaps Achilles. I will come to your own tent and take yours. Then you will learn who is king here." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Achilles' hand flew to the hilt of his great sword. A murderous rage, white-hot and blinding, seized him. He was half-drawn to cut the king down where he stood. But at that moment, the goddess Athena, sent by a worried Hera, swept down from Olympus, visible only to him. She seized him by his golden hair. "Calm yourself," she whispered urgently. "I have come to check your rage. Do not draw your sword. Attack him with words, and I promise you, one day you will receive gifts 3 times as splendid for this insult." Achilles, chastened, slid his heavy sword back into its scabbard, but the rage in his heart was not quenched. It merely changed its form. He turned back to Agamemnon, his voice now cold with a terrible resolve. "You drunkard, with the eyes of a dog and the heart of a deer," cried. "You have never dared to arm yourself for battle with the troops, or go on an ambush with the best of the Achaeans. It is far easier to stay in the wide camp and steal the prize of any man who speaks against you. But I swear this oath by this scepter, which will never again sprout leaves since it was cut from the mountainside. The day will come when the sons of Achaea, one and all, will long for Achilles. And on that day, when they are dying in droves at the hands of man-killing Hector, you will be helpless to save them, and you will tear your heart out in remorse for having shown no honor to the best of the Achaeans." He hurled the scepter, studded with gold, to the ground and sat down, his fury a palpable force. The assembly dissolved in chaos. Agamemnon, though shaken, would not back down. He sent Chryses home on a ship with Odysseus, but then he sent his heralds, Talthybius and Eurybates, to the tent of Achilles. "Go," he commanded them, "and take the fair-cheeked Brises by the hand and bring her to me." When the heralds arrived, Achilles greeted them with grim courtesy, for he knew they were only following orders. He turned to his men. "Bring her out," he said, his voice thick with pain. And as his beloved companion Patroclus led the weeping Brises from the tent, Achilles watched her go, the living symbol of his honor, his Tim torn from him. When she was gone, he walked alone to the shore of the gray sea and wept, calling out to his mother, the silver-footed goddess Thetis. She rose from the depths like a mist and sat beside him, stroking his hair as he poured out the story of his humiliation. "Mother," he pleaded, "since you bore me to a life that is to be so short, surely Olympian Zeus ought to have granted me honor." He has not. The son of Atreus has shamed me, has taken my prize of honor with his own hands. Thetis, her heart breaking for her doomed son, promised to help. She flew to the highest peak of Olympus, where she knelt before Zeus and clasped his knees in supplication. She reminded him of how she had once saved him from a rebellion of the other gods. "Grant me this," she begged. "Give honor to my son. Give strength to the Trojans, and let them pin the Achaeans against their own ships. Let them slaughter them until the day they are forced to honor my son and pay him the tribute he is due." Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, sat in silence for a long time, for he knew this would enrage his wife Hera, who hated the Trojans with a bitter passion. But he was bound by his debt to Thetis. He nodded his great head, and all of Olympus shook. "It shall be done," he rumbled. The die was cast. The rage of Achilles would now be answered by the will of the king of the gods. With Achilles, the bulwark of the Achaean army, withdrawn into his tent, a terrible change came over the war. It was as if the sun had been extinguished from the Greek sky. The Trojans, who had cowered behind their walls for fear of Achilles, now swarmed onto the plain, led by the glorious Hector, their spirit renewed. Zeus, true to his promise, tipped the scales of battle in their favor. The days that followed were a litany of Greek disaster. Truce was called for a duel between Paris and Menelaus to decide the war once and for all. Menelaus, the hardened warrior, easily overpowered the handsome prince. He was dragging Paris by his helmet's chinstrap back to the Greek lines, ready to claim his vengeance, when Aphrodite, cloaked in mist, snapped the strap and whisked her favorite away, depositing him safely back in his perfumed chambers with Helen. The truce was broken when the goddess Athena, goaded by Hera, tricked a Trojan archer into firing an arrow at Menelaus, wounding him and plunging the armies back into the fray. The fighting was brutal. The great Greek heroes Diomedes and Ajax fought like lions, holding back the tide for a time. Diomedes, infused with strength by Athena, went on a rampage, wounding even the gods Aphrodite and Ares when they dared to enter the battle on the Trojan side. Hector and Ajax fought a tremendous duel that lasted until nightfall, ending in a draw, with the two warriors exchanging gifts as a sign of mutual respect. But these were fleeting moments of success. The overall tide was turning inexorably against the Greeks. Led by Hector, who seemed possessed by a divine fury, the Trojans pushed the Achaeans back, step by bloody step, across the plain. They breached the defensive ditch around the Greek camp. They smashed through the wooden palisade. The fighting raged among the ships themselves, the last line of defense. The Greeks were no longer fighting for glory or plunder. They were fighting for their very lives, to prevent their only means of escape from being turned to ash. Hector, his eyes blazing, called for torches. The Trojans surged forward and set fire to the ship of Protesilaus. The black smoke, a signal of utter defeat, billowed into the sky. From his tent, Achilles watched the disaster unfold, his heart a cold, hard knot of pride and pain. Agamemnon, in his desperation, had sent an embassy to him the cunning Odysseus, the giant Ajax, and his old tutor, Phoenix. They came bearing promises of apology and immense treasure. Tripods, gold horses, and of course the return of Briseis, untouched, along with an oath from Agamemnon that he had never laid a hand on her. They pleaded with him, appealing to his honor, his duty, his friendship. But the Achilles they spoke to was not the same man. His wound was too deep. He listened to their pleas and then delivered a speech that shattered the very foundations of the heroic code they all lived by. "I say no wealth is worth my life," he told them, his voice quiet but terrible. "A man's life breath cannot come back again once it has passed his lips. My mother, the goddess Thetis, tells me I have two fates. If I stay here and fight, my journey home is gone, but my glory, my Cleo's, will never die. If I go home to the fatherland I love, my glory dies, but my life will be long. And I tell you now, I value my life more than all the treasures of Troy. Why should I fight for a man who has dishonored me? Why should I risk everything for the sake of men who stood by and let it happen? Tell Agamemnon I am sailing for home at dawn. Let him find another to save him." The embassy failed. The Greeks were alone. And as the flames licked higher from the burning ship, it seemed their doom was certain. It was Patroclus who broke the deadlock. Patroclus, who was more than a friend to Achilles. He was his other self, his Therapon, the one person in the world he truly loved. He could not bear to watch the slaughter any longer. He went to Achilles' tent, his face streaked with tears for the dying Greeks. Achilles, he wept. If you will not fight, then at least let me. Let me wear your armor. Let me lead your Myrmidons into battle. Trojans will think you have returned, and they will fall back in fear. It will give our comrades a moment to breathe. Achilles, seeing the anguish of his friend, finally relented. His heart ached at the sight of Patroclus's grief. Go then, he said, his voice heavy. But listen to me, Patroclus. Okay. Obey this one command, so you may win great honor for me, and they will be forced to return the girl and give me glorious gifts. But once you have done that, you must come back. Do not, in the heat of your glory, press on to the walls of Troy. The gods love that city, and one of them might strike you down. Do not rob me of my own glory to come. He helped Patroclus stand the magnificent armor, the armor of a god. He assembled the Myrmidons, his elite warriors who roared with joy to see, as they thought, their great leader returning to the fight. As Patroclus charged into battle at their head, the effect was instantaneous. The Trojans, seeing the famous armor and the terrifying crest of the helmet, panicked. Achilles, the cry went up. Achilles has returned. Their lines broke. Patroclus was a storm of death. He drove the Trojans from the ships, doused the flames, and pursued them across the plain. He fought with a skill and fury that surprised everyone, killing Trojan after Trojan, including Sarpedon, a mighty warrior, and a beloved son of Zeus himself, who watched from Olympus and wept tears of blood as his child fell. But victory is a heady wine. In the thrill of his Aristeia, his moment of supreme glory, Patroclus forgot Achilles' warning. He did not turn back. He pressed his attack all the way to the high walls of Troy itself. 3 times he charged the wall, and 3 times he was thrown back by the god Apollo, who stood upon the ramparts, his eyes glowing with divine anger. Go back, Patroclus, the god boomed. It is not your fate to sack the city of Troy, nor is it the fate of your master, who is a far better man than you. Patroclus, stunned, fell back. But in that moment of hesitation, Apollo, shrouded in a thick mist, came up behind him and struck him between the shoulders with the flat of his hand. The blow was immense. Patroclus' helmet flew from his head and rolled in the dust. His spear shattered, his shield fell from his arm, and his divine armor clattered to the ground. Dazed and disarmed, he was an easy target. A young Trojan named Euphorbus stabbed him from behind with a spear. Patroclus stumbled, mortally wounded. And then Hector, seeing his chance, strode forward and drove his own spear through Patroclus's belly, ending his life. As he lay dying, Patroclus gasped out a final prophecy. You boast now, Hector, but death and mighty fate are standing beside you, to be struck down at the hands of Achilles. Hector, triumphant, stripped the glorious armor of Achilles from the body and put it on himself. A fierce battle raged over the naked corpse. Menelaus and Ajax fought their way through and carried the body of Patroclus back to the Greek ships. The news reached Achilles like a physical blow. When he heard that Patroclus was dead, a black cloud of grief enveloped him. He let out a cry so terrible that his mother Thetis heard it in the depths of the sea. He fell to the ground, pouring dust and ash over his head, tearing at his hair, his body convulsed with sobs. The rage he had felt for Agamemnon was a flickering candle compared to the inferno of grief and fury that now consumed him. His pride was gone. His honor was meaningless. His life was worthless. All that remained was a single burning purpose: revenge. Thetis came to him, her heart broken, and held her weeping son. I will go back, Achilles choked out. I will go back and kill the man who killed my friend. I no longer wish to live unless I can make Hector pay for Patroclus' death with his own life. He knew what this meant. His mother had told him his fate. If he fought, he would die young at Troy. By choosing to fight, he was choosing to die. He reconciled with Agamemnon, who formally returned Briseis. Achilles barely glanced at her. I wish she had died, he said coldly, before she ever caused this strife between us. His mother flew to Olympus and begged the smith god Hephaestus to forge new armor for her son. Hephaestus, indebted to Thetis, worked through the night, and by dawn, he had created the most magnificent armor the world had ever seen. The shield, in particular, was a masterpiece, depicting the entire world in miniature. 2 cities, one at peace, with weddings and festivals, and one at war, with sieges and ambushes. The stars, the sun, the moon, and the boundless ocean. It was the world Achilles was about to leave behind. Clad in this new, gleaming armor, Achilles was no longer just a man. He was a terrifying, inhuman force of destruction. He rode out at the head of the Achaean army, and the Trojans, seeing him, fled in terror back to the safety of their walls. All but one. Hector, shamed by the disastrous advice he had given his troops to camp outside the walls, felt he could not retreat. He stood alone before the Sion gate, waiting. As Achilles charged toward him, a primal fear seized Hector, and he turned and ran. The greatest warrior of Troy fled from the greatest warrior of Greece. 3 times they circled the mighty city, the hunter and the hunted. Finally, the goddess Athena, disguised as Hector's brother Deiphobus, appeared at his side and tricked him into stopping to make a stand. The duel was short and brutal. Hector cast his spear, but it glanced harmlessly off the divine shield. Achilles, his eyes blazing with a cold fire, hurled his own. It flew true, piercing Hector's throat at the one spot unprotected by the armor. He wore the armor that had once belonged to Achilles himself. As he lay dying, Hector begged Achilles to return his body to his parents for a proper burial. But there was no mercy in Achilles' heart. "I wish my fury would drive me to carve you up and eat you raw," Achilles snarled. "No, the dogs and birds will feast on you." With his last breath, Hector prophesied Achilles' own death at the hands of Paris and Apollo. Then he was silent. In his madness, Achilles committed his greatest atrocity. He pierced Hector's ankles, threaded the leather straps of his own belt through them, and lashed the body to the back of his chariot. Then he whipped his immortal horses and dragged the noble defender of Troy in the dust, his head lolling, his dark hair trailing all the way back to the Greek camp in full view of his horrified parents Priam and Hecuba, who watched from the city walls, their screams of anguish lost on the wind. For 12 days the rage of Achilles festered. He held magnificent funeral games in honor of Patroclus, but his grief found no release. Each morning he would lash Hector his body to his chariot and drag it 3 times around Patroclus's funeral mound. But the gods protected the corpse from decay and mutilation, for they were offended by this desecration. Finally, Zeus decided it must end. He summoned Thetis and told her to command her son to accept a ransom for the body. Then he sent Hermes, the messenger god, to guide old King Priam on a secret, impossible mission. Under the cover of night, the aged king, his chariot laden with a priceless ransom of robes, tripods, and gold, was led by the god into the very heart of the enemy camp, right to the door of Achilles' tent. Priam entered alone and knelt before the man who had slaughtered so many of his sons. He did something no man had ever done before. He took the killer's hands in his own and brought them to his lips. "Remember your own father, Achilles, godlike Achilles," the old king wept, his voice breaking. "He is an old man, just as I am, on the painful threshold of old age. Perhaps his neighbors are pressing him hard, with no one there to protect him. But at least he has the joy of knowing you are still alive, and he can hope, day after day, to see his beloved son return from Troy. But I am completely bereft. I had 50 sons when the Achaeans came, and now most are gone. The one who was my best, the guardian of my city, you have just killed him. It is for his sake I have come to ransom his body from you. Have pity on me, Achilles. Think of your own father, and show me mercy. I have brought myself to do what no other man on earth has done, have kissed the hands of the man who killed my son." The words pierced through the armor of Achilles' rage and struck his heart. He thought of his own father, Peleus, old and alone, whom he would never see again. A wave of sorrow washed over him, and he took the old man's hand and gently moved him away. And then the two of them wept together, Priam for his noble son, Hector and Achilles for his own father and for his beloved Patroclus. The sound of their shared grief filled the tent. When he had finished weeping, Achilles rose. His rage was gone, replaced by a profound, sorrowful understanding. Had the body of Hector gently washed and anointed, and wrapped in fine linens. He lifted it onto the chariot himself. "Your son has been released to you, old man," he said softly. "I will grant you a truce. For how many days do you need to bury glorious Hector? They agreed on 12 days. The Iliad, the great song of the rage of Achilles, does not end with the fall of a city or the victory of an army. It ends with a funeral. It ends with the people of Troy mourning their fallen hero Hector, breaker of horses. It ends with a moment of shared humanity, a fragile peace born from an ocean of grief, a quiet understanding that in the brutal calculus of war, everyone, victor and vanquished, is ultimately a loser. The fall of the high-towered city, cunning and destruction. The 12 days of truce passed in a heavy, sorrowful silence. Within the walls of Troy, they mourned their protector, Hector, the breaker of horses. On the shores, the Achaeans mourned their own countless dead, and none more so than Achilles, whose grief for Patroclus was a wound that would not close. But truces, like the lives of men, are fleeting things. When the 13th dawn broke, red and angry over the sea, the war began anew. Yet something had changed. With Hector gone, the soul of the Trojan defense was broken. The old king, Priam, was lost in his grief, and the Trojan warriors, who had once fought with such fire, now looked out from the battlements with fear in their eyes. They had seen the godlike Achilles in his full, terrifying wrath, and the sight had unmanned them. They huddled behind their walls, daring only small skirmishes, and the war settled back into a grim and weary stalemate. It was then that hope arrived from the east, riding on the wind like a storm. From the banks of the river Thermodon came the Amazons, the warrior women, their bronze armor flashing, their war cries sharp and fierce. They were led by their queen, Penthesilea, a daughter of the war god Ares himself. She was a vision of terrible beauty, as skilled with the spear as any man, and she had come to Troy to aid its people and to cleanse her own soul of the guilt of accidentally killing her sister in a hunting accident. She burned to face the man who had slain the great Hector, to test her might against the legend of Achilles. Her arrival was like a lightning strike to the heart of the Trojan army. Their spirits soared. With the Amazons fighting beside them, they poured from the gates, and for a time, they drove the Greeks back. Penthesilea was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down hero after hero, her skill and fury a match for any Achaean champion. The Greeks, stunned by this new onslaught, began to falter. But Achilles, hearing the din of battle, strode from his tent. He had no interest in these new foes. His heart was still a hollow cavern of grief, yet the duty of a warrior called to him. He moved through the battle like a specter of death, his divine armor deflecting every blow, his spear finding its mark with unerring accuracy. Soon, only two champions remained on the field: Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Greeks, and Penthesilea, the queen of the Amazons. They circled each other, two predators sizing up their prey. Penthesilea cast her spear first, a throw of incredible power. But it glanced off the shield Hephaestus had made, the shield that depicted the world. Achilles did not even flinch. He advanced, his own spear held low. He saw, in her eyes, not fear, but a warrior's pride, a fire that matched his own. For a moment he hesitated, seeing a reflection of his own doomed glory. But the moment passed. He lunged, and his spear, which had tasted the blood of Hector, pierced through the queen's breastplate, and she fell from her horse with a sigh. As Achilles stepped forward to claim his prize, he knelt and removed her helmet. And then he froze. He looked upon her face, now peaceful in death, and saw a beauty that rivaled Helen's, a nobility that surpassed that of any king. A wave of profound, unexpected sorrow washed over him. He had killed not just a warrior, but a queen, a woman of breathtaking grace. The Greek soldier, Thersites, a man known for his foul mouth and twisted spirit, saw the look on Achilles' face and began to mock him, jeering that the great warrior had fallen in love with the corpse of the woman he had just slain. In a flash of his old rage, Achilles turned and, with a single blow of his fist, shattered Thersites' jaw and his life. The act was brutal, but no Greek dared to question it. They saw in their champion's eyes a grief that was new, and somehow even more terrible than the one he held for Patroclus. The hope of the Amazons had been extinguished. But Troy's allies were not yet exhausted. From the south, from the sun-drenched lands of Ethiopia, came another army, led by the mighty King Memnon, son of Eos, the goddess of the dawn. He was a warrior of immense stature. Clad in armor, also forged by the divine smith Hephaestus, and he was cousin to Hector himself. He came to avenge his kinsman and to save the city. Once again, the Trojans surged from their gates, and Memnon proved to be a warrior almost on par with Achilles. He killed many Greeks, including the brave Antilochus, son of the wise old Nestor. The tide of battle turned yet again. It seemed that as long as Achilles lived, Troy could not win. But as long as Troy could summon such champions, the Greeks could not win either. The war had become a bloody, revolving door of heroes. Finally, the two titans met. Achilles, son of Asinymph, and Memnon, son of the dawn. Their mothers watched from the heavens, their hearts filled with dread. The duel that followed was a battle of demigods, a clash that shook the earth. Spears shattered, swords rang like thunder, and the dust of the plain rose to choke the sky. But in the end, there was only one Achilles. He found an opening in Memnon's defense and drove his spear deep into the Ethiopian king's heart. As Memnon fell, his mother, the dawn, wept, and her tears fall to the earth each morning as the dew. Achilles had done it again. He had slain two of Troy's greatest allies, two of the mightiest warriors in the world. He stood invincible, a figure of terror and awe. In his battle madness, he felt that nothing could stop him. He chased the fleeing Trojans all the way back to the city, slaughtering them as they ran. He was determined to end the war himself, right there, right then. He charged toward the Sion Gate, the main gate of Troy, ready to storm the city alone. But he had forgotten the gods. He had forgotten the prophecy. And he had forgotten that Apollo, the archer god, the protector of Troy, still watched from the walls, his heart black with hatred for the man who had killed so many of his favorites. As Achilles surged toward the gate, a figure stepped out to meet him. It was Paris. Paris, the archer, the lover. The man who had started this whole war, but had so often shied away from its consequences. He held his bow, but his hands trembled before the terrifying visage of the charging Achilles. He would have fled, but a voice, calm and deadly, whispered in his ear. It was Apollo. "Draw your bow, son of Priam," the god commanded. "I will guide your shot." Paris drew the string back to his ear. He aimed not with skill, for he had little against such a foe, but with blind hope. He let the arrow fly. It was a desperate, fluttering shot that would have gone wide of any mortal man. But this arrow was not guided by mortal hands. Apollo, unseen, caught the shaft in a gust of wind and steered it with divine precision. Flew straight and true, not at the divine armor, not at the mighty shield, but down. Down to the one spot on the hero's body that was mortal. It struck Achilles in his right heel, the heel by which his mother had held him when she dipped him in the river Styx. The pain was immense, shock that jolted through his entire body. The invincible Achilles, the man who had never been wounded in battle, stumbled. He turned, his eyes wide with disbelief, and tried to pull the arrow from his flesh. But the poison of the Hydra, with which the arrow had been tipped, was already working its way through his veins. He fell to his knees, his strength leaving him in a sudden, shocking rush. The greatest warrior the world had ever known died in the dust before the gates of Troy, slain not by a mighty champion in a glorious duel, but by a coward's arrow, guided by the hand of a vengeful god. A great cry went up from the walls of Troy, a cry of delirious joy and relief. From the Greek camp came a roar of disbelief and despair. A furious battle erupted over the body of Achilles. The Trojans, emboldened, surged forward to claim it as a trophy. But the giant Ajax with his tower-like shield stood over the fallen hero like a mountain, holding back the entire Trojan army while the cunning Odysseus fought off the attackers and managed to carry the body back to the safety of the ships. The grief in the Achaean camp was absolute. They mourned Achilles for 17 days. His mother, Thetis, and her sister Nereids rose from the sea to lead the lament. On the 18th day, they burned his body on a great pyre and mixed his ashes with those of his beloved Patroclus in a single golden urn, so they might be together for eternity. But even in death, Achilles brought strife. His divine armor, forged by Hephaestus, was to be awarded to the bravest of the remaining Greek heroes. Two men stepped forward to claim it, Ajax the Great who had saved the hero's body, and Odysseus, who had carried it from the field. Ajax, a man of simple, immense courage, argued that his strength and his kinship with Achilles gave him the greater claim. Odysseus, the master of words, argued that his cunning and strategy, which had saved the army time and again, were of greater value than brute force. The captive Trojan princes were asked to judge, and swayed by Odysseus's eloquence, they awarded the armor to him. For Ajax, this was a dishonor he could not bear. To be judged second to any man, especially in a matter of martial honor, shattered his mind. A black madness, sent by the goddess Athena, fell upon him. That night, convinced he was attacking the Greek leaders who had wronged him, he stormed through the camp. But in his delusion, he did not see men. He saw the army's flock of sheep. He slaughtered them all, whipping and torturing 2 rams he believed to be Agamemnon and Odysseus. When the sun rose and the madness lifted, Ajax awoke to find himself surrounded by the bloody carcasses of animals, his sword dripping with their gore. The shame was too much for a man of his pride to endure. He took the sword that Hector had given him in their duel years before, fixed it in the earth, and fell upon it, taking his own life. The Greek army, which had lost its greatest warrior, had now lost its strongest as well, not to a Trojan spear, but to its own internal rivalries. The war was now truly at a stalemate. The Greeks, demoralized and leaderless, could not take the city. The Trojans, without Hector, dared not risk a decisive battle. It was then that the seers spoke again. They captured Helenus, a son of Priam and a prophet, who revealed that Troy could never fall unless 3 conditions were met. First, the Greeks must bring the great bow and poisoned arrows of the demigod Heracles to the fight. Second, they must persuade Achilles' own son, the young Neoptolemus, to join their cause. And third, they must steal the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that was housed in Troy's citadel and was believed to protect the city. The tasks fell, as they always did, to the man of cunning, Odysseus. He first sailed to the desolate island of Lemnos. There 10 years before, the Greeks had abandoned the archer Philoctetes, who had been bitten by a venomous snake and whose wound festered with such a foul stench that they could not bear his presence. But Philoctetes was the keeper of the bow of Heracles. Odysseus, using a mixture of trickery and persuasion, managed to soothe the bitter archer's anger and convince him to return, where he was healed by the army's physicians. Next, Odysseus journeyed to the island of Skyros, where he found Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. He eagerly agreed to join the war and prove himself worthy of his lineage. The first 2 conditions were met, and soon after, Philoctetes, wielding the mighty bow of Heracles, faced Paris in battle. He drew an arrow, and this time, there was no god to save the Trojan prince. The poisoned tip struck Paris, inflicting a wound that was agonizing and incurable. Paris, screaming in pain, was carried back to Mount Ida, to the nymph Oenone. The wife he had abandoned for Helen, he begged her to heal him, but her heart was hardened by his betrayal, and she refused. Paris died in agony, and Oenone, in her grief and remorse, threw herself onto his funeral pyre. The man who had started the war was dead. Only one task remained, the theft of the Palladium. This was the most dangerous mission of all. Disguising himself as a beggar, his face beaten and scarred to make him unrecognizable, Odysseus slipped into the city of Troy itself. He met with Helen, who, weary of the war and longing for home, agreed to help him. Later that night, he returned with the warrior Diomedes. They scaled the city walls, found the temple, killed the guards, and stole the sacred statue, carrying it back to the Greek camp. All the prophecies were now fulfilled. The Trojans were terrified, believing their city's divine protection was gone. And yet the great walls still stood. The city remained impregnable. It was clear that Troy would never be taken by force. It would have to be taken by guile. And so, in the mind of Odysseus, the final, most audacious plan of the war began to take shape. He proposed a stratagem of such breathtaking deception that it bordered on madness. The Greeks, he argued, must make the Trojans believe they had given up and sailed for home. And they must leave behind a gift, an offering so magnificent that the Trojans, in their pride and relief, would be compelled to take it into their city. They would build a giant, hollow wooden horse. The master craftsman Epius, with the help of the goddess Athena, oversaw the construction. They built it from the wood of fir trees, a colossal beast that towered over the plain, its belly a hollow cavern large enough to hold a company of the bravest Greek warriors. When it was finished, Odysseus, Neoptolemus, Menelaus, and a handful of other chosen heroes climbed inside, their hearts pounding in the dark, cramped space. The rest of the Greek army burned their camp, making it look as though they had abandoned it in haste. They launched their 1,000 ships and sailed away, but not for home. They sailed only as far as the nearby island of Tenedos, where they dropped anchor on the far side, hidden from Trojan eyes. They left behind only two things on the vast empty beach: the colossal wooden horse, and a single man named Sinon, a cousin of Odysseus, who had been chosen for the most difficult role of all, to be the liar who would sell the fate of Troy. When the morning sun rose, the Trojan scouts on the walls could not believe their eyes. The Greek camp was gone. The ships had vanished. The 10-year siege was over. A wave of ecstatic joy swept through the city. The people poured out of the gates, laughing and cheering, to gaze upon the abandoned camp and the strange, monstrous horse that stood alone on the sand. They gathered around it, debating what to do. Some, like the cautious Thymetes, urged that it be brought inside the city as a trophy. Others, fearing a trick, argued it should be burned or broken apart. Then the priest of Poseidon, Laocoon, rushed down from the citadel, his sons at his side. "Are you mad, you wretched people?" he cried. "Do you think the enemy has truly gone? Do you think any gift from the Greeks is free of deceit? I fear the Greeks, even when they bear gifts." And with all his might, he hurled his great spear into the horse's wooden flank. The sound of groaning bronze echoed from within, and had the fates not willed it otherwise, the city would have been saved. But at that moment Trojan shepherds dragged forward a captive. They had found hiding in the marshes. It was Sinon. He played his part to perfection. Weeping and pleading, he told them a masterful tale of woe, how the hated Odysseus had framed him, how the Greeks had planned to sacrifice him to the gods to ensure a safe voyage home, and how he had escaped at the last moment. The horse, he explained, was a giant offering to the goddess Athena. It's made so large specifically so the Trojans could not bring it into their city. For if they did, he swore the favor of the goddess would pass to Troy. They would become invincible, destined one day to conquer Greece itself. His story was convincing, but some Trojans still hesitated. And then the gods gave their final, terrible sign. From the sea, monstrous serpents rose from the waves, their eyes burning like coals. They slithered onto the shore and made straight for Laocoon and his two young sons. They coiled around the boys, crushing their small bodies, and as Laocoon rushed to help them, they seized him as well, their venomous fangs sinking into his flesh. The priest and his sons died in agony, and the serpents, their grim work done, slithered up to the citadel and coiled at the feet of Athena's statue. The Trojans, horrified, saw this not as a warning, but as a punishment. Laocoon had struck the sacred offering with his spear, and the goddess had exacted her revenge. All doubt vanished. They must bring the horse into the city. They put rollers under its feet and ropes around its neck. They even had to tear down a section of their own mighty wall to get it through the gate. All day they pulled, singing hymns of victory, as the prophetess, Cassandra, Priam's daughter, followed them, screaming her prophecies of the fire and death that they were dragging into their home. But she was cursed by Apollo never to be believed, and they laughed at her as a madwoman. That night, Troy celebrated as it had never celebrated before. The war was over. They had won. Wine flowed freely, and the entire city, exhausted and delirious with joy, drank itself into a deep, stuporous sleep. The dead of night, as the city lay silent under the moon, Sinon crept to the great horse and slid open the hidden bolt. A rope snaked down, and one by one, the Greek heroes emerged from the belly of the beast, ghosts of vengeance in the sleeping city. They killed the slumbering guards at the gates and threw them open. Then they lit a beacon, a signal to the fleet waiting at Tenedos. The 1,000 ships sailed back from their hiding place, their dark hulls slicing through the silent water. The Achaean army poured through the open gates and swarmed into the unsuspecting city. The slaughter began. The Greeks, their hearts hardened by 10 years of war and loss, showed no mercy. They moved from house to house, killing men in their beds, their victory cries mingling with the screams of the dying. They set fire to the magnificent buildings, and soon the great city of Troy, the jewel of Asia, was an inferno. King Priam was cut down by Achilles' brutal son Neoptolemus as he clung to the altar in his own palace. Women and children were rounded up to be sold into slavery. The temples were desecrated, the treasures looted. Everything was destroyed. By the time the sun rose, the city that had stood for 1,000 years was a smoking ruin. The Trojan War was over. Echoes and embers, the fates of victors and vanquished. Listen, and I shall tell you that the fall of a city is not an end, but a transformation. The night Troy burned was a night of triumph for the Achaeans, a bloody, cathartic release after 10 years of toil and grief. But victory, when won with such brutality, is a poisoned chalice. The gods who had watched the long war with vested interest now watched the sack of the city with growing horror. For the Greeks, in their final unrestrained fury, forgot the one law that binds both mortals and immortals. They forgot piety. They had not just conquered a city, had desecrated a holy place. In the great temple of Athena, Ajax the Lesser, a man whose courage was matched only by his arrogance, found the prophetess Cassandra clinging to the sacred statue of the goddess. He tore her from the altar and raped her there, on the holy ground. An act of sacrilege so profound that the wooden eyes of the statue itself were said to have looked to the heavens in shock. In the royal palace, Neoptolemus, the savage son of the savage Achilles, found old King Priam seeking refuge at the altar of Zeus, with no regard for the sanctity of the place or the dignity of the aged king. He butchered him, spilling his royal blood upon the sacred hearth. The temples were looted, the priests were slain, and the Trojan women, now spoils of war, were dragged screaming from the arms of their gods. The Achaeans, drunk on wine and slaughter, celebrated their victory. But on Olympus, the scales of divine justice had tipped. Athena, her fury now turned against the Greeks, for the violation of her temple, went to her uncle, Poseidon, the earth-shaker. "Let us work together," she proposed, "and give the Achaeans a bitter homecoming." Poseidon, who still harbored a grudge against the Trojans for a slight long past, but was ever an agent of chaos, readily agreed. The sea, which had carried the Greeks to their glory, would now become their tomb. As the victors finally set sail, their ships heavy with plunder and slaves, the gods unleashed their wrath. A great storm, born of the combined fury of Athena and Poseidon, fell upon the fleet. Winds tore the sails to shreds, lightning shattered the masts, and mountainous waves swallowed ship after ship. The fleet was scattered across the Aegean, and the long, cursed journeys home the Nostoi began. For many, the journey home would be longer and more terrible than the war itself. The most powerful of them all, the High King Agamemnon, was granted a swift return. He sailed home to Mycenae, his heart swelling with pride, his new prize, the haunted prophetess Cassandra, at his side. He dreamed of the hero's welcome that awaited him, of the feasts and the accolades. He did not know that for 10 years his wife, Queen Clytemnestra, had been nursing a cold, patient hatred in her heart. She had never forgiven him for the sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia at Aulis. While he was away winning glory, she had taken his cousin Aegisthus as her lover, and together they had plotted his demise. When Agamemnon's ship appeared in the harbor, Clytemnestra met him with a chilling display of false devotion. She rolled out a crimson carpet for him to walk upon, a path of royal purple fit for a god, an act of hubris he uneasily accepted. As he entered his palace, Cassandra was seized by a terrifying vision. She saw the blood-soaked history of the house of Atreus, a house built on cannibalism and kinslaying. She saw the net, the axe, the bath filled with blood. She screamed her prophecies of the king's imminent murder and her own, but as always she was cursed never to be believed. She walked into the palace to meet her fate. Later, as Agamemnon relaxed in a warm bath, weary from his journey, Clytemnestra struck. She threw a heavy net over him, tangling his limbs, and as he struggled like a trapped beast, she struck him. 3 times with a double-headed axe, 1 blow for her husband's betrayal, 1 for her stolen, his daughter, and 1 for the gods below. The great king who had commanded 1,000 ships and conquered the city of Troy died ignominiously in a bathtub, slain by his own wife. The violence of the war had followed him home and consumed him. His brother Menelaus fared better, though his journey was long. He and Helen were blown off course by the great storm and wandered the seas for 8 years, visiting Cyprus, Phoenicia, and even the shores of Egypt. There they amassed a new fortune, and their strange, complicated love seemed to find a new equilibrium. When they finally returned to Sparta, they resumed their reign, living out their days in a kind of haunted peace. Two figures forever defined by the war their passion had caused. They were the eye of the hurricane, the still point around which a world of heroes had been destroyed, and they almost alone survived it. But the greatest journey of all was reserved for the most cunning of the Greeks, the man whose stratagem had finally won the war, Odysseus, king of Ithaca. His story, the Odyssey, is a 10-year epic of its own. Cursed by Poseidon for blinding his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus Odysseus was driven across the unknown western seas. His journey a testament to human endurance and divine caprice. He lost all his ships and all his men to monsters and enchantresses, to the six-headed Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis, to the hypnotic song of the sirens, and to the wrath of the sun god Helios. He was held captive for 7 years on an island by the beautiful nymph Calypso, who offered him immortality, if he would only forget his home. But the longing for home, for Nostos, burned in Odysseus's heart. He endured, he schemed, he suffered, and finally, after 20 years away, he returned to Ithaca, alone, shipwrecked, disguised as a wretched old beggar. He found his palace overrun by a mob of arrogant suitors, all vying to marry his faithful wife Penelope and claim his kingdom. With the help of his now-grown son, Telemachus, and the goddess Athena, his constant protector Odysseus revealed himself in a moment of shocking violence. Wielding his great bow, which only he could string, slaughtered every last one of the suitors in his own great hall, reclaiming his home and his family in a final bloody battle that was a microcosm of the great war he had left behind. His was the story of the survivor, the hero whose greatest weapon was not his spear, but his mind, his unyielding will to live and to return. While the victors struggled against the curses they had earned, a different story was unfolding for the vanquished. Not all of Troy had perished in the flames. Aeneas, a Trojan prince, son of the goddess Aphrodite herself, had been warned by his divine mother to flee the dying city. He was not to die defending a lost cause. He was destined for something greater. As the city burned around him, Aeneas displayed a different kind of heroism. Not the glory-seeking rage of Achilles, but the dutiful piety, the pietas that would define him. He did not seek out a glorious death, sought to save his family and his people. He hoisted his frail, elderly father Anchises onto his shoulders. Anchises, in turn, clutched the Penates, the sacred household gods of Troy. Aeneas took his young son, Ascanius, by the hand, and told his wife Creusa to follow close behind. In the chaos and the darkness, Creusa was lost, becoming one last tragic sacrifice to the fall of Troy. But Aeneas, with his father, his son, and a band of Trojan survivors, escaped the ruins and made his way to the sea. He carried the past on his back and held the future by the hand. Thus began the journey of the Aeneid, the great Roman epic. While the Greeks were scattered by the gods in punishment, Aeneas and his followers were guided by the gods in fulfillment of a prophecy. They were destined to wander, to suffer, but ultimately to found a new Troy, a new civilization that would one day rule the world. Their journey took them across the Mediterranean. They landed in Carthage, a rising city in North Africa, where Aeneas fell into a passionate, tragic love affair with its founder, Queen Dido. For a time, he forgot his destiny, tempted by love and comfort. But the gods reminded him of his duty, and he sailed away, leaving the heartbroken Dido to curse him and his descendants before taking her own life upon a funeral pyre. An act that planted the mythical seeds of the bitter rivalry between Rome and Carthage. Aeneas journeyed to the underworld, where the shade of his father showed him a vision of the future. A parade of the great souls who would be his descendants: Romulus, Caesar, Augustus. He saw the destiny of Rome laid out before him. This was no longer just a journey of survival. It was a mission of world historical importance. Finally, after years of wandering, the Trojans landed in Italy, at the mouth of the Tiber River. This was Latium, the promised land. But their struggles were not over. Just as in the Iliad, a conflict erupted over a contested marriage. The local king, Latinus, offered his daughter Lavinia to Aeneas, but she was already betrothed to Turnus, the fiery king of the Rutulians. The goddess Juno, her hatred for the Trojans still burning bright, fanned the flames of war. The second half of the Aeneid is a new Trojan War, fought on Italian soil. Turnus, a warrior as proud and full of rage as Achilles, led the Italian forces against the Trojan newcomers. The battles were fierce, the losses grievous. But Aeneas, now a seasoned leader, fought not for personal glory, but for the future of his people. He was the hero of duty, of the greater good, a man who had learned to subordinate his own desires to a divine plan. The epic ends with a final dramatic duel between Aeneas and Turnus. Aeneas wounds his rival, and Turnus, defeated, begs for his life. Aeneas hesitates on the verge of showing mercy. But then he sees that Turnus is wearing the sword belt of Pallas, a young friend whom Turnus had killed. A sudden, terrible rage aflash of the old heroic Furious is Aeneas, and he drives his sword into Turnus's chest, killing him. The poem ends abruptly, on this note of violent, righteous anger. A stark reminder that even the most pious of empires is founded on blood and steel. And so, the story of the Trojan War comes full circle, yet it never truly ends. It is a tale of two legacies. For the Greeks, it was their crowning achievement, the moment their name, their Kleos, became immortal. But it was a glory that consumed them. The war drained their heroic generation, and their violent victory brought curses that shattered their royal houses and scattered their people. It was the magnificent, tragic end of the Age of Heroes. For the Trojans, their utter annihilation was paradoxically the seed of their rebirth. From the ashes of their fallen city, Aeneas carried a destiny that would lead to the founding of Rome. The losers of the old. War became the founders of a new and greater empire, one that would conquer the Greeks themselves and inherit their culture. The story of Troy became the foundational myth of Western civilization, a story retold and reinterpreted by every generation. It is a story that teaches us that the line between hero and villain is as thin as a sword-edged edge, that glory is often a mask for grief, and that the consequences of war ripple outward through time, touching shores and generations far from the original conflict. The high towers of Ilium are gone, the heroes have turned to dust, but the echoes of their rage, their sorrow, and their undying quest for honor still resonate today, a timeless testament to the terrible, tragic, and enduring power of the human heart.